T.B.Photo X1.5 to FX, and welcome back to another video. And this time I am gonna present to you the camera that I would like to call the Nikon F4's backup brother. It's nothing else than the Nikon F-501, or others might know it as Nikon's very first autofocus camera. Well, in the US this was also known, it was sold under the name Nikon N2020. So in hindsight this is, well, that's what we're gonna find out right now. Well, basically, the specs on this camera. It has, the shutter dial on this is a little bit special. It's very, tactile, it's very, analog feeling, but it has a shutter mode of one, it goes from bulb mode, the B on the shutter speed dial, then it has 1 second, half second, fourth, 8th, 15th, and then it's 30th of a second, 60th, and then you have the red marked number 125. That means that this camera has a maximum flash sync speed of 1/125th of a second. Then you have 250, 500, 1000, and 1/2000th of a second in maximum shutter speed. Excuse me. I still have a little bit of a cold since last week, so yeah, bear with it. I'll just edit out the noise. But anyway, also you have 4 special modes on this camera. So because this it was a bit in the time when you had both professional cameras but also cameras that had a little bit of the less experienced photographer in mind. But anyway, you have first A, which is Aperture Priority. That means that you set the depth of field and the camera chooses the exposure. But anyway, then you have P Dual, and what P Dual means is that if you had a AIS lens, you can use a combo of shutter and aperture priority on this camera. So it was a little bit of a special program mode. Then you have P, which is straight out program mode, and then you have P High, which is basically if A on this camera was aperture priority, then P would be shutter priority. Even though you couldn't really, choose a shutter speed, it meant that the camera would always try to use the fastest shutter speed possible. So yeah, that was a little bit of a specialty with this camera, but I usually use it all in manual mode. Excuse me. Well, as I stated before, the maximum flash sync speed is 1/125th of a second, and also what was a little bit, I have claimed now that this camera is a little bit of the little brother or the backup to the Nikon F4, which seems to be a very hot potato now around 35mm film camera connoisseurs, because I've seen a ton of YouTube reviewers all talking about the Nikon F4, which has had the consequence that the second-hand market for that camera is flourishing and the prices are soaring. But this one doesn't really get that much love and attention, and I think it's a crying shame because this is also a very capable little camera. Well, anyway, also you have on this side you have the ISO setting, and also on this camera you have ±2 f-stops of exposure compensation, which was a kind of a nifty feature for a higher end camera from Nikon. Also, what should we see? Well, it only has 1 metering mode, which is a little bit half-assed in this era, but it is a center weighted meter, so it's not a spot metering and it's not Nikon's matrix metering. It is a center weighted, and what type of center weighted I haven't really been able to figure out, but anyway, it's center weighted, that's all I know. This was Nikon's first autofocus camera, and it uses a passive TTL CCD phase detect autofocus system. Yeah, and the shutter on this camera, it is on L for now. It's L for locked. Then you have S for single, and C is continuous. So this can actually take pictures at a blistering 2.5 frames per second. Yeah, that's kind of cool. Some of the controls on the upside, as I said, this has automatic film winding, so you will be able to, wind the film automatically forward, but when you have to rewind it to take out the film canister, you actually have to do it still the old-fashioned way. There is a two-part clutch here, a button and a little slider that you have to press simultaneously to disengage the clutch and be able to rewind the film. Other nifty features up here, you have, as stated, the single continuous. You have the film counter, which knows which frame you're on. You have a silent or beep mode, which will give you an audible beep tone when the camera is in focus and so on. Yeah, on the back side you have the little window to see what type of film you have in it, and I'm actually using now Kodacolor 200 ISO 24 frames. And a little bit of a thing here is that here you have a little window with a lighter and darker blue ribbon that actually will spin while when the film is advanced. So yeah, it's a little bit of a manual marker for that the film is winding properly. On the front here you have a little cover here, if I can screw it up. Yeah, screw it up, really. But behind here you have the 2-pin connector for the Nikon proprietary electronic release. So on older cameras you had the cable release system, but on this camera you had an electronic cable release, electric cable release. Underneath you have the silver button, which is basically the clutch to disengage the lens in order to swap lenses on it. And underneath you have a 3-position little switch that is very nice. Actually, this is very much easier to manipulate than the one on the Nikon 801 actually. That's very stiff, while this is very fluent. It's basically M for manual focus, then you have C for continuous, and S for single. So if you have it in continuous, as long as you have the trigger half pressed, the camera will hunt focus for you. But also on the other side you have these 2 buttons, or 3 buttons. You have the red one, which is the timer release. You have the AFL, which is autofocus lock, and you have the AEL, which is auto exposure lock. That means that when you have it on continuous focus and you have focus on a subject but you want to recompose, you basically put your ring finger on the AFL, which means autofocus lock, so you focus, you lock it, you recompose, take the picture. So that's a little bit of a nifty feature, and that's basically it. And if you look in the viewfinder of this camera, you basically have the Nikon 2 arrows and a red, or 2 red arrows and a green dot, which is the autofocus or the focus detect or phase detect indicators. And on the right hand side you have red illuminated numbers for the shutter speed. You will have a continuous light on the one that the camera wants you to use, and a little bit of a blinking light on the one that you are currently set to. Or is it the other way? No, it's the other way around. It's a continuous light on the one that you are currently on, and a blinking light on the one the camera wants you to select. So basically that's all there is about this camera. So do I like it? Yes, it's a brilliant piece of kit, and I think this is a Nikon classic that doesn't get enough love and attention. Why is this, in my opinion, a significant Nikon SLR camera body to own? Well, a lot of people talk about the F4, as stated before. This one is the younger brother of the F4. But also, if you have seen Digital Rev with Kai and Locke and Alambi, I think there was the 3 of them, they had this competition when they were gonna take and buy a second-hand used 35mm SLR each, and Locke chose to buy the Minolta Maxim 7000. And what is so significant with the Minolta Maxim 7000? Well, that was the world's first real autofocus 35mm consumer grade camera. But it seems like Minolta tried to push technology a little bit too far, while Nikon, when they did the F-501, they basically took the tried and tested Nikon 301, put in the autofocus motor, and they added these buttons here and a few other, the switch here and these 3 buttons were basically added to a Nikon 301, as well as, of course, the autofocus motor. But basically, Minolta, they made their, and this is basically what Kai said about the camera in Digital Rev. He said it was basically a super calculator. What Minolta did was that they made it with an LCD on it, and they made it with a lot of buttons on it instead. There were no dials really on it. Instead, you had to press down one button and use arrow keys to increase and decrease different settings and so on. So it was very finicky when it came to how to set up the camera, and it was also, the trigger on it was a touch sensitive. It was a touchpad basically that relied on pressure rather than, this one, it's more mechanical, that you have a dual stage trigger. The Minolta, it was basically a certain amount of force would activate the autofocus, and if you applied more force, it would take the picture. But this one, the Nikon version, it's so much more tried and tested technology, and I think it's a shame that this is not more out there than it is, because it's a beautiful, beautiful, neglected Canon, or Canon. It's a beautiful, neglected SLR, 35mm SLR camera that I think should get a little bit more attention than it currently has. So yeah, that's all for me for now, and I'll try to get some sample images from this and see a little bit what I've been taking with this camera. But anyway, as always, this is Tobias Bergstrom from T.B.Photo X1.5 and I'd like to see you guys in the next video. And as always, please like, share, comment, and subscribe, as you're supposed to say in this YouTube malarkey. And that's all from me from now on. Bye.